As well, and I believe say something.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
All right, and we're both good here. All right, hi out there.
Hey guys.
How's everybody doing?
And gals and Zeers.
Oh, Zeers, is that?
That's one of the pronouns, one of the 70. So I just want to make sure that I'm not putting anybody in a box that they don't want to be in.
Yeah, okay. Well, hi everybody. So I'm here with Hunter Motz. I think, is this our third in our ongoing conversation?
I think so.
The third in our series.
Yeah.
And we're co-releasing this, so if you're listening to this on my podcast, I am hereby inviting you to check out Hunter's podcast, where you'll hear this very same conversation.
Though probably once it's on mine, I will somehow fuck up the exact same audio.
Really? That would take some doing.
It would take some doing, but I have that sort of power. Oh, we're doing shoes off? I like this. This is what I love about being with Chris Ryan.
It's casual. It's casual Monday.
Yeah.
The other thing, the other announcement I wanted to make right here at the beginning is that for both of us, I think we've agreed, our Patreon viewers will have access to a video component of this podcast, which is being recorded even as we speak. That's literally true. As we speak.
Yeah.
It's being recorded on this iPad, which I'm showing the Patreon folks right now, and we can see what's happening. For some reason, the camera seems to like me better than Hunter so far.
Yeah, we've established this because the camera has a built-in charisma meter.
Charismometer.
Charismometer. Sounds very scientific. Was that invented by the same people that invented phrenology?
Probably. You know, I know I have a friend, I won't mention any names, but I have a friend who's a psychiatrist who is sort of like, oh, see the shape of the head? See the placement of the ears? I'm like,
Dude, did you get the memo? That's not science anymore.
Like as of 100 years ago?
Yeah, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, that is the basic problem, is that very often these ideas linger long past when the evidence has moved on.
Okay, see, here we go. We're right into it already. Now, is it so outlandish to think that there would be physiological correlates of basic intelligence? Not racial necessarily, but physiological. I mean, do you think that you can look at a photograph of someone and with, statistically significant accuracy judge whether that's an intelligent person, an average person, or a below average person in terms of intelligence?
Well, there's the old thing, right? You can tell you can see if somebody is intelligent by looking at their eyes, right? And certainly having met plenty of Scientologists, there's a certain dead quality that many of them have in the eyes, right? But what is that dead quality that you talk about when you say a human, you can see that there's like something going on, right?
Yeah.
There's an emotional alertness as opposed to sort of being in a state of like apathy and disengagement.
But I associate that more with psychological trauma than with a lack of intelligence.
But I think that's the point, is this gets down to what is intelligence.
Right.
And so crucially, there's this graph from Joseph Henrich's The Secret of Our Success.
There you go, dropping names.
Again already.
Hunter Motz,
but
name
drop
dropper.
these names. Tell me about these two books that you have for us.
We'll get to. I mean, it's all really. These are just books that I'm using in the manuscript I'm working on. And this morning I was doing some reading, and I thought, this would be interesting to talk with Hunter about. The first one is Hierarchy in the Forest, The Evolution of Egalitarian Behavior by Christopher Bohm. I'm showing this now to the camera for those of you who are watching on the camera.
By the way, it's also well posted. Now you get to see what is your reading process. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can we look at these post-its?
This is the reading process for when I'm working.
Yeah.
So.
Mechanisms of egalitarianism, weapons. Very interesting. Anti-hierarchy. Yeah, so because the point is that a lot of this is trying to refute the standard narrative of red in tooth and claw, right?
Right. Well, Bohm has a very interesting, a pretty nuanced argument because, and I am down with his argument. Like, I don't know if you remember in Sex at Dawn, I sort of confronted this question, what is human nature? And I said, well, asking that question is like asking what's the natural state of H2O.
Right.
It's so contextual, you know. So we clearly have a capacity for violence. We have a capacity for cooperation. We have a capacity for competition, and on and on. So it's very contextual. However, I feel that we are, because of the amount of time that we've spent in particular social systems, we're more, we have predispositions toward certain things and certain behavior patterns. And so when we come out of alignment with those predispositions, it results in some sort of psychological trauma, PTSD being the most sort of salient example, right? We crave community. We're capable of being hermits. Most of us could survive some period of time in isolation without losing our shit. But obviously that's not, what we want. So it's the capacities versus tendencies, I think, is the way I phrase it in this book. But what Bohm argues is that humans are, like chimpanzees, bonobos, and virtually all other primates, deeply hierarchical in our sort of biological predisposition. But because our survival in hunter-gatherer bands was so dependent upon cooperation and fairness, that we've developed over hundreds of thousands or millions of years mechanisms for avoiding that hierarchy becoming getting out of hand. And the other thing that's very interesting that people don't really talk about much, like Steven Pinker, and we'll probably be trashing those guys as we seem to do every time we get together. They have a big belief in the interloper, the selfish interloper theory. So the idea being that hunter-gatherer, our ancestors couldn't possibly have been egalitarian, Rousseauian love monkeys, because you'd have some selfish interloper would come along and take advantage of the situation and out reproduce everybody else. And so these selfishness would be selected for.
That's right.
But what they're forgetting is that everybody's fucking armed in a hunter-gatherer group. And it doesn't matter how big you are. If some asshole comes along and starts telling people what to do, he gets a fucking arrow in the back.
And you can just look at how human beings behave when people are assholes. They punish the asshole.
Or elect them president.
But crucially, so it's not even necessarily... So this sort of comes back to tie this into Joe Henrich, the name that I like to drop a lot, and I drop it because it's a good resource for anybody trying to get their way into this research, Henrich talks about how humans actually have two dimensions of power. So there's dominance, but there's also prestige. And so prestige is that you can acquire power by being of service to the community.
Right.
And by demonstrating that you have positive social skills that are useful.
Right.
And that is the emotion of awe. And you want to copy people who are prestigious, and you want to be like them and learn their virtues, and that's how you rise up within the hierarchy of your tribe, by being more useful to the tribe. So it's an entirely different axis to power, social power, rather than dominance. So I think that's the first thing, and that is fairly unique among primates, right? Like there isn't an awe mechanism.
Well, bonobos.
Bonobos have awe?
Yeah, bonobos, the hierarchy, Frans de Waal speaks about this explicitly. He says that, first of all, the female hierarchy determines the male hierarchy. So even though the males are bigger than the females, 15 to 20%, same as chimps and humans on average, it's the females who basically run the show because they really stick together, and the males are more fragmented and can't get their shit together cooperatively.
So the future is female.
If there's going to be a future, it's probably going to be female. But what the beauty of female rule, and we talked about this in Sex at Dawn as well, is that female rule tends to be inclusive. So it's not the mirror image of patriarchy where women are, owning men and ordering them around. Women, because I guess we can talk about reasoning for this, but in matriarchal societies, the reason they're not recognized by anthropologists is they don't look like the inverse of patriarchy.
Right.
The men are happy.
Right.
Men are included in decisions. They just don't rule the way they do in patriarchy. Well, what were we talking about?
So there is this prestige mechanism, this all mechanism.
Oh, with bonobos, right?
Yeah.
So the bonobo female hierarchy is determinative of like where we're going to go feed and where, if we're going to move, whatever. And the male's position in the male hierarchy is based upon his mother's position in the female hierarchy. So if your mother is a dominant female, then you are de facto a dominant male, even if you're like super chill and don't, tell anyone what to do. So it's, and then the other thing that Duvall talks about is that as opposed to chimps where dominance is determined by aggression and coalition building and successful backstabbing, with bonobos, you don't even want to call it dominance. The sort of exalted state of your hierarchical positioning is determined by affection and respect.
Wow.
He spent most of his life observing bonobos, and he said that the dominant females aren't aggressive. They're not more aggressive. They're just, everyone loves them. They're consulted.
Right.
So that's very much like what we see in hunter-gatherer societies. Right. Now, you're talking about these mechanisms. I thought I'd read something here. This is great. This is from Richard Lee, who's an anthropologist who was in Africa in the 70s and 80s. I think he's still writing. He's often cited on hunter-gatherer stuff. He says, say a man's been hunting. He mustn't come home and announce like a braggart, hey, I just killed a big one in the bush. First, he'll come and sit down in silence until someone else comes up to the fire and says, so what did you see today? And he'll reply quietly, I'm no good at hunting. I didn't see anything, maybe just something small. And then he says, I'll smile to myself because I know he's killed something big.
Yeah.
There's this humility. So he says, a proud hunter's heavy use of denial and euphemism demonstrates the degree to which the group is able to intimidate its more prominent achievers. And even after this show of modesty, other band members preemptively take pains to put down the hunter. Yep. When they go to carry in the kill, they express their disappointment boisterously.
Yeah.
They'll say, you mean you dragged us all the way out here to make us cart home this little pile of bones? Oh man, if I knew it was this thin, I wouldn't have gotten up from the fire. Oh, this is crazy. I gave up a day in the shade. So there's all this kind of joking ridicule, which, we see this in male societies generally,
It sounds like boarding school.
It sounds like boarding school. Sounds like
the pub.
The gym, any sports team. Yeah. It's like, hey, you're cool, but hey, you're just,
But let's remember you have a tiny dick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. And that's, so I think that goes really deep in us. But we've spun out of control now where, instead of leadership being based upon respect and admiration and just like, hey, you're a good dude, now leadership is something that can be taken and wielded.
Well, but it's the problem is that it's the mechanisms of social control, right? So teasing, right, which is what we're talking about, teasing works well when, it's a group of people who know each other, who feel comfortable doing that,
right.
who, are able to use those mechanisms effectively.
It's not scalable.
Well, it is scalable. And if you look at the emergent behavior of the internet, there's a lot of teasing that's going on, right? That's what a lot of this meme making, the nicknaming, all of that, that's the emergent culture, is that global village that teases and ridicules.
But is it effective? I mean, is Donald Trump going to be hounded out of office by tweets?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, right? Like, the community knows what he's doing, right? So it's very hard to keep secrets anymore. So very much like a global village. I think that's the spirit of Donald Trump. He doesn't... the Donald
agitating the
watching.
shades.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that, I think that increasingly, there's just going to be greater and greater transparency about what every other human is going on, what is going on with every other human, and that we're increasingly going to be able to call each other out on our shit much, much better. And I think that's the culture that will emerge from the internet.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, interesting, because the thing is, I can see the dynamic you're talking about. It makes sense. But the thing about the internet is certainly social media, which is where that kind of teasing and all those mechanisms would come into play. You can just ignore it. You can just turn it off.
Oh, yeah, you can. And I think that's, if you look at what's interesting, sort of like having walked around this podcasting universe a little bit, Podland, and listen to how people react, they tend to say, oh, you should ignore the YouTube comments, or you should ignore the people on Twitter.
Right.
And I think that's a mistake. I think the key thing is that there's a big difference between bullying and teasing, right? And bullying is one-sided and teasing is reciprocal.
Which brings us to your thing with Sam Harris, of course. Very funny, by the way. You sent me that thing this morning.
Yeah.
When I first looked at the photo, it's from Zoolander?
Zoolander, yeah.
When I first looked at the photo, I didn't realize that wasn't, what's his name, the actor?
Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller.
Stiller, yeah.
He looks so much like Ben Stiller.
Yeah.
So you've inserted his Sam Harris's face onto Ben Stiller and your face onto Owen Wilson.
Yeah, it's Hansel. I didn't do it. All credit goes to Unicorn and Unikitty, Nicole Lee Page and Matt Madonna, who are two people in our community by those nicknames.
Oh, all right, cool.
But so the we've sort of talked a little bit about Dawkins and Harris, right? And we've talked about them previously on this podcast. And that there's, the point of science is intellectual accountability, right? You're supposed to put your idea out there as a hypothesis that's clear and testable. It's tested against the evidence. It succeeds or it fails. It's nothing personal, right? And that, if your conclusions are good, then they can be verified by the community. But part of the problem is that within science, that there are certain individuals who have this extra degree of power, either because they have a successful track record in the past, or alternatively because they've become big public figures. And so what ends up happening is they're not intellectually accountable, and they're able to do, what you were talking about with the sort of intellectual rope-a-dope, right? Where they never take a punch, and they're never held accountable on what do you believe, right? And so the point of all of this has been to try and restore intellectual accountability using the mechanisms of the internet.
Yeah, the problem is, to play devil's advocate here,
Do it. I love it.
You can't respond to everyone. I get shit sometimes from people that I never responded in any detail to the person who wrote a book-length refutation of Sex at Dawn.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't do that is that I see no evidence that person exists.
Right.
Their name seems to be a fake name.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of them. So I don't feel compelled to sit down and spend hours or days or weeks of my life responding in detail to an argument made by a person who won't even say who they are.
Yep.
And it's not like they have to hide behind WikiLeaks because Putin's going to shoot them. I mean, there's no physical danger involved in disagreeing with me. So that gave me a nice easy out. Sam Harris could say, well, I don't need to answer to you. Who the fuck are you? I get 1 million emails a week. I'm not going to.
Totally. And that's the point is that, the traditional thing, the traditional notions or intuitions of debate, right? That you're going to challenge the person and then you're going to meet for a face-to-face conversation. You're going to hash things out, right? And, Sam was very clear on Rogan. He was like, I'm not going to debate him. Who's this guy? Everybody has a Twitter account now. It's all blah, 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 blah. Right? Although
just the fact that he's talking about you on Rogan says that he knows who you are. Well, he's read some of your
Well, it was pretty
arguments.
Hilarious because what he said on Rogan was he was like, Hunter, is it Mott's? And,
I know. He's very... The thing about... And I've never met Sam Harris, and so I'm, whatever. But I've listened to a few of his podcasts. I listened to one recently that I really enjoyed, actually, about... It was with Tristan Harris, who's a technology ethicist. Yeah. That was a really interesting conversation. But Sam Harris is extreme. To me, he's like one of these guys in high school who hung out with the cool kids, but he knew he wasn't quite a cool kid. And so he sort of guarded he was very clever about guarding and protecting his access to that cool crowd and excluding other people from the cool crowd who weren't, because if he let anyone else in, it might expose that he's not really one of the cool kids. Yeah. There's this weird, like, heightened awareness of status and, you know, if you went to Stanford or you didn't, and I'm good friends with them. But, you know, a lot of this name dropping. And he constantly refers to these intellectual struggles he's had that he always wins. I mean, even in that podcast, and I haven't listened to a lot, so again, I may just be full of shit here. But even in that, he referred 3 or 4 times to different debates he'd had and how he'd like decimated the person's arguments, and how he just seems very. He seems like a small guy who's very, like, uptight about it.
Well, and he's trying to.
I mean, small physically, by the way. I don't mean that like personality or anything. He's obviously smart and he's articulate, but
I think he's very intellectually insecure. And when you're intellectually insecure, then what happens is that you try and build a persona and you try and make it seem like you're really smart.
But why would he be intellectually insecure? He's published, half a dozen books. You know, that's a lot of exposure. You know, I mean, I can say, and you as well, when you're writing a book, you feel like, God, if I'm making a fool of myself here, you're pretty naked.
Yeah. And
so he's put a lot out there.
Yeah, and that's the point. And so if you look at what he does, you know, I mean, John Haidt called him out for being very litigious, right? And that's what he does.
Legally?
He's like a lawyer. That's how he approaches other people's arguments. And the point is that that's not really the scientific mindset. It's not experimental.
Your manly beard is
scratching
on the mic there.
Is that better?
That's better for now.
But my main point is that, you know, I don't, we can psychoanalyze Sam all day. But I think the interesting thing is that, you know, he's now had intellectual struggles with a lot of people. He's been out there for, 10 plus years.
Right.
And he keeps on saying that he's trying to have conversations with people that, reasonable conversations about difficult topics. And then they don't go well. And then he's like, ugh, other people, right? And at a certain point, you have to be like, is the issue other people, Sam, or is the issue you, right?
Yeah. It's funny, you know, I often refer to this quote, I don't even know who said it first, but, admire those who seek the truth and fear those who claim to have found it.
And that is the key issue.
There's a surety.
There's a surety, and that is what makes him attractive to young people and to people who are lost.
Yeah, good point.
And if you look at, because I've now engaged with a lot of followers just to sort of suss out that profile of who are these people.
Right.
And they all have Twitter handles like @atheistsensei, ex-Mormon atheist, atheist penguin. This is like a core thing on their identities, or, they've had some sort of traumatic experience. Yeah. And so that's what happens. And the result is that, and this is part of a larger thing where I called out Sam as a fundamentalist, because the question is, what is fundamentalism? And there's often this idea that fundamentalism is religious, right? But having gone back and forth between the Middle East and the U.S., I think that John Haidt is right, that fundamentalist is really about that righteous mind.
Yeah, it's the absence of doubt.
That's right.
You can be a capitalist fundamentalist. It has nothing to do with religion per se.
Yep.
You can believe the Cowboys are the best team that has ever. It's clear. How can you even argue with it?
That's right. And so
they are America's team.
Well, we know that, right? But that righteousness, that's the real problem, I think, right now on the internet. Is that people have these righteous minds about certain issues, and they get defensive and they get reactionary. And the point is that whatever I said, right, something that I said clearly bothered Sam enough that he couldn't help bringing it up on Rogan. So in some sense, I got under his skin. But to me, what's exciting is this, which is that Sam Harris, for the first time in his life, has said something that is a clear, testable hypothesis, which is that he has said that Hunter Motz does not understand the relevant biology. Mm-hmm. He said that I didn't understand half the biology. Well, I'm Hunter Motz, and now...
Is that how you pronounce it?
That is how you pronounce it. And so now I can just teach the relevant biology, and then we can see whether I understand it. And if I understand the relevant biology, well, then that means that Sam Harris made a snap emotional decision about me based on limited evidence, in the same way that he made a snap emotional decision about the Muslim world on very limited evidence.
Well, it doesn't mean that.
Well,
it doesn't mean that. You're making a lot of leaps there.
Well, then let's go through these leaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
The fact that someone makes a snap emotional decision, a judgment in a conversation about one thing doesn't mean that.
Well, but we have to look at let's see. So Sam's conclusions about the Muslim world. So I've now had a couple of Muslim guys on my podcast, right? And I was born in Saudi Arabia. I lived in, a little bit in the Middle East. And the point is that I don't think, and a large part of this also came out of having had to teach the controversy at a creationist school, right? A Christian school. And so what I noticed is that when you're at those schools, the new atheists are used to stereotype scientists. Right? So this behavior that is playing well to the hometown crowd is actually being used to alienate people from science and say these people are arrogant, they're condescending, they don't actually understand Christianity, or they don't understand what it's about. And so, in fact, even though he is preaching to the choir, someone like Sam is actually hurting science. Right? He's hurting science because he's discrediting. He's an ambassador for our brand. And if you're somebody who grows up in a Christian community, then now you've got this guy who doesn't seem to understand, the value of your culture, the value of your belief system at all. And so if they don't understand that, then they're probably wrong about a lot of other things.
Can science be hurt?
The brand of science can be hurt.
The brand of science.
So science is a brand.
Well, yeah, but science itself, no, science isn't a brand. Science is a process. Science is a method of discovering the truth.
So
it's not a brand.
So who do you go to?
That's like saying walking is a brand.
Well,
walking is a method of movement.
Well, there's the method that is the core, right? So there's the scientific principle and the scientific methodology. But then there is science as an institution, right?
Well, yeah, but that's not science. Those are institutions that have grown up around science and the funding of science and the sense of authority that certain scientists accrue, but that's not science.
Well, but this is the thing, is that may be how Chris Ryan understands it, but there are 7.5 billion humans.
Oh, fuck them.
Fuck them. What do they fucking know?
How Chris Ryan understands it is what matters.
The correct way. The Dallas Cowboys are America's team.
God damn it. No, but you see my point. I mean, it's like the difference between, God and religion, right? You can say God is God. And I like the whole Jewish thing of not even trying to, you can't draw, you can't define, it's just God. And that's kind of undeniable in a way because you can't get your fingers around it. But, religion is a bunch of bullshit generally. So I think it's the same thing. Like science is science. Science is it testable? Is it repeatable? Have other people done it? Statistical significance, all that kind of stuff. That's science. It can't be hurt any more than water can be broken.
Nor can the Christian principle be hurt. Love thy neighbor as thyself, the golden rule.
Exactly.
It's inviolable.
Exactly.
Right? But sometimes human beings don't live the Christian principle.
Right.
And so sometimes the institution that is built around that Christian principle, the church, right, is not accountable to that principle. The humans have been corrupted by power and they're not living that principle.
By the way, the charismometer is really on you.
It's responding to me?
You've been on screen.
It's because you rubbed off on me, Chris. I've picked up some of your charisma.
It's the sofa. It's all over the sofa.
That reminds me of your cat story, by the way.
The great cat story. You see the poster? There's a movie poster in there.
No,
9.5 Lives, because that
is so funny.
In the other room.
Yeah, that's so funny.
The video of me and the cat is in a film festival
Amazing.
Somewhere. Yeah.
But so for about a year now, I have been calling for a scientific reformation.
Yeah.
Because the institution is not responsive to the principle.
So let's talk about that article I tweeted at you recently, because I think that gets to what we're talking about, the difference between science and the institutions. So quick summary, there's a guy named Daryl Bem, who I think I've met him, and I've known about his work for a long time because he's friends with Stanley Krippner, who's sort of my mentor in grad school and a very close friend, been on the podcast a lot. And Stanley's a very interesting guy because you and Stanley would have a great conversation. Wow, that would be fun to set up. Stanley's 86, 7, something like that now. And he is sort of, I think he's the only person, and people from different parts of this debate have told me this. Stanley's the only person who's deeply respected by both the skeptical community and the people who are investigating psi and telepathy and psychic healing and
all that stuff, yeah.
So he's the guy in the middle that both sides say, well, Stanley's a good guy, we trust him, we know what he's this linchpin. He's friends with the amazing Randy, he's friends with Kreskin, all these people, both sides. Like he was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson one time back in the 70s when all this stuff was really big, and Kreskin was bending spoons and Stanley was Stanley's also a stage magician, so like a lot of these guys, so they know how to do this, anyway, so the point was, the article I think was on Slate, and the headline was Daryl Bem proves something like Daryl Bem proves the existence of telepathy, therefore science is broken. And when I read that, I sent it to Stanley, and Stanley said, well, the problem with this is the journalist makes the classic mistake that scientists are trying to avoid, which is starting with a conclusion and then filling in, backfilling. So the journalist started with the conclusion that these findings cannot possibly be true, so it doesn't matter how well designed the methodology is. If it arrives at this conclusion, there must be something wrong with the methodology. And the conclusion is, Daryl Bem set up these experiments basically, without getting into a lot of detail. I'll put the link up on, or just Google Daryl Bem, B-E-M, and Science is Broken, and you'll find this article. But basically what he did was he's done this series of experiments for probably the last 20 years that show that people have physiological reactions to images that are flashed on a computer screen nanoseconds before the image comes up.
Right.
So there are images of kittens and flowers and sunsets, and then interspersed randomly, there are images of, well, there's some porn, The ones they talked about in the article were porn, but in earlier experiments, there were images like a rattlesnake striking, or a snarling tiger, or a pistol pointed at the viewer. And so they're randomly in there, and what they found, they had these sensors on people's brains and body, and they found brain activity, electrical activity, surged nanoseconds before one of the disturbing images came up. And it's a really well-designed study. And so what it seems to suggest is somehow people are reacting to those stimuli before they could possibly
have detected them
physiologically through their eyes.
Some sort of precognition.
So there's something going on with time that doesn't fit with our conception of time. Now, I read those experiments and I was like, have those been repeated? Yes. Have they been repeated by other experimenters? Yes. How many? 20, 30? Fuck.
Yeah.
Wow. But a lot of scientists read that and they go, yeah, something wrong with science then.
Yeah.
Science is broken.
Well, and crucially, this is where having an understanding of history of science is important. Because if you look, for example, at what happened with physics, 100 years ago, they had these nice, tidy models. They were like, our models are so great. And then there were all these problematic findings, like the photoelectric effect and double slit experiment. And they were like, this is really problematic. And some people just want to sweep that data under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist because it would mess up your model.
But, see, and I think we could rank sciences probably in terms of their integrity to the results. So physics and mathematics is probably at the top. Mathematics, it's like, hey, this equation is correct, and that's the result, then that's the result. Nobody's going to be like, whatever. Physics is basically mathematics, so that's probably high up. Toward the bottom, psychology, medicine. I mean, think, who was the guy who argued for decades that doctors not washing their hands.
Oh, Ignaz Semmelweis? Or no,
yeah,
no.
I think it was
Ignaz
Semmelweis. Yeah. So he was in Britain, right?
No, Austria.
Austria?
Yeah.
And he was arguing that the surgeons coming from surgery...
Well, specifically coming from the morgue. So these...
where they were working on
the
cadavers.
The hospital rotation was they were like rubbing their hands all over dead bodies and then going and delivering women's babies.
Yeah.
And all these women were dying of puerperal fever,
right.
childbed fever, and that it was all caused by that. And crucially, he was like, listen, a chlorinated hand wash, crashes the risk of these deaths.
And he proved it, he demonstrated it experimentally.
That's right.
And no one would listen to him.
And he was hounded out.
He was hounded out of medicine. He died homeless and insane.
Yep.
And because there was no germ theory.
Yep.
They couldn't explain how that could be true.
To make sense of it. Yep.
And I think that's where we are with Daryl Bem.
I think that's where we are with a lot of things.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's not even necessarily, the Daryl Bem one I can't comment on, but with a lot of this stuff, the problem is just that there isn't the underlying framework or the pieces exist,
right.
but it hasn't been pieced together, hence mixed mental arts.
Right.
The point of that is to piece together a cohesive worldview. And it's not that, I've done that, right? But I have, the analogy that I use is the blind man and the elephant. You know this story?
Right.
Yeah.
Depends what part you're touching.
That's right. And so the point is that, we've now sketched out a child's drawing of the elephant that is good enough to attract enough of a crowd that people now will help refine and improve that. And the clearer and clearer that view of the elephant gets, the more people will come in and the more we can improve that view of the elephant. But it's, after hundreds of years of the scientific endeavor, it's time to clarify what it is that we figured out.
What's funny about that story about the blind man and the elephant is that even referring to the story, we refer to an elephant.
Yeah.
So we know it's an elephant.
Well, that's true. We don't even know what it is.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. We're not describing an elephant. We're describing something we have no word for. We have no idea what it really looks like.
That's right.
And see, this gets us back to where we started with the importance of a humble acceptance of doubt.
Yep.
Because we'll never have the full picture.
No.
And even when we have data points, those data points, if there's no underlying structure, if there's no germ theory in the case of Semmelweis, or there's no relativity in the case of physics that you were talking about, then we're always, the data points are always going to be ahead of the theoretical construct that explains them.
100%. And, one of the examples that Joe Henrich gives is he says, and I remember because I thought this was so funny, we've had him on the podcast a few times, but at some point he was like, he kept saying this thing, and it was clear that he was like trying to work out something for himself. He's like, sometimes they like invent a bunch of steam engines first before you come up with a theory of how steam engines work.
Yeah, you need to work on that metaphor there, Joe.
Yeah, but he's like, but crucially, like, that's kind of heresy in terms of what scientists tend to believe. Right? The scientists tend to believe that theory is the bee's knees, as opposed to that data appears and then you have to make sense of what data is available.
But that is how science progresses.
That is how science progresses. But the point is that means that the progress of humanity is often that we are, it is this sort of dance back and forth of like people are inventing shit without the help of science. Then science comes up with some theory to clarify the thing, which then allows us to better invent.
Yeah.
So we could become more intentional about the process.
Right.
So that's the nature of, and there are usually these stupid arguments that happen in the public sphere where people are like, theory is better than practice, or practice is better than theory. And it's like so dumb because you need both.
Yeah.
But the point is that we now, and I think there are now 60 million scientific papers, right? Roughly 130 million books, and the problem is that the West has baked in these atomistic intuitions, right? So these intuitions towards individualism, and so if you look at the way that science is structured, the scientific establishment, it's all broken up into these tiny little departments, and they talk about interdisciplinary work, but the speed at which they're happening is not fast enough. So why is, science not necessarily winning out on the internet? Because it's not a cohesive worldview. It's, there's talk of it being a collective endeavor, but that's not the cultural baggage of the people who are running science. And it's not being put together into a worldview that is accessible and practical enough that it can be disseminated to the public. And so that's our job. But part of the challenge is, okay, great, how do you then draw enough attention to it? And part of how you...
I'm just going to move your mic.
This is so romantic.
Isn't this nice? I'm just going to clip this right here.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But part of how do you draw attention to it, and to a certain extent, so this is where Henrik's work comes in, is, humanity's superpower is social intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so you have to create controversy, you have to create social drama that can then draw people into the ideas. And so that was really the point of the whole Sam Harris thing, and I called out a bunch of other fundamentalists, and it was all just to create enough social drama that people would then be drawn in, and then you can break down the ideas and make them accessible.
So you're not even really that concerned with whether Sam will ever agree to sit down with you?
I was never concerned with whether Sam would sit down to agree with me, because I didn't think that he would, because his whole brand, he's built a whole brand around this new atheist thing. Yeah. And fundamentally, for him to engage with all of the latest science, it would destroy his brand. Most of his preceding work would no longer make sense. So I don't think, I think that he and Dawkins have created a scientific dodo.
Right.
And it's not going to survive contact with most of this science.
Right.
Now, the point is that he has the opportunity to, kill his own baby.
Right. Which would give him a better brand.
Exactly. That would be the strategically smart thing to do, would be to put the dodo out of its misery himself and say, look at how much integrity I have. I'm responding to this evidence. I'm going to move forward. Yeah. But is he going to do that or not? That's his call, right? I would prefer that, right? Because that would be even better social drama to drive even more attention to the ideas. Right. But, he does that or he doesn't. That's
so what's the last big thing you've been totally wrong about?
For me, I think the big difference is that a lot of my big humiliation happened offline. It was before I was, sort of a presence. But there are two big experiences, like life-changing, humiliating experiences that I talk about on the show, that I'll tell you now. So the first was, I graduated from Harvard, had a degray in biochemistry.
That's humiliating.
Well, that was humiliating. But then I moved out to Los Angeles and found myself surrounded by, and very much had that sort of rationalist idea, and then was surrounded by all these actors who were talking about emotions all the time. And I was like, what the fuck? Because I had these assumptions, reason is where it's at, emotions are stupid, right? And, came to find out that, at some point I got so frustrated and so annoyed with all these actors talking about all these emotions. I was like, this is unscientific. You guys don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And so ran off and read all the emotions research I could, and then was humiliated to find out that they actually understood human nature better than I did. So that was really humiliating. And then the other thing that was really humiliating was 2010. I was visiting my family in Libya, and we were in the Sahara Desert. And I read John Haidt's happiness hypothesis, and came to realize the degree to which science had reinvented the wheel on a lot of ancient wisdom. And I sort of had internalized this myth that everything before had been worthless superstition, and then science had figured it all out, and it was new, and science, and then came to, that was sort of the beginning of my detribalization.
Right. Well, that's an important moment, and that's, I think that ties into... that's interesting. That sort of self-aggrandizement of science, saying anything that's not scientific is ridiculous bullshit, voodoo nonsense, is spread. That's like a stain that has spread into our entire worldview. Yep. So I picked up this book, Utopia for Realists, because Matt Taibbi wrote a review of it in Rolling Stone. I really like Matt Taibbi.
What was the vampire squid thing?
Yeah. But I think he's one of the smartest writers, and he's also really fun to read. And everything. Anyway, so, and this seemed like it would be a good source book, and I think it will be for a new section of Civilized to Death that I've decided to add to the mix, which explains the delay, folks. That and my, constant laziness. which is where I'm looking for examples of programs and ideas and individuals and communities who are taking some of the principles of this knowledge of how our ancestors lived and using that understanding of the nature of our species to redesign their lives or redesign society, or implement new policies or something that are more in alignment with who we actually are. So redesigning the human zoo to be more like the San Diego Zoo rather than the Calcutta Zoo, right?
Right.
So this book is very much about ideas for making the future better. And one of the big ideas is universal basic income, which I'm very interested in. Anyway, so I got this book the other day. I opened it this morning over breakfast. And here's what I read. These are the first words of this book, okay? The author's Dutch. His name's Rutger Bregman.
It just gets better and better. I'm already excited. I'm bathing.
He says, let's start with a little history lesson. In the past, everything was worse. For roughly 99% of the world's history, 99% of humanity was poor, hungry, dirty, afraid, stupid, sick, and ugly.
Yep.
What the fuck?
Well, but that's the myth. That
ugly?
But that's the culture. That's the myth that cultures tell about other cultures, right?
Well, exactly. That's what everyone thinks. They're the fucking chosen people.
Exactly.
And so do we. But what we do is, some of us located geographically still, Israel or America or France, but we do it temporally. I call it presentism. That this is the best time to be alive. This is such a great moment.
Well, and crucially, the degree to which you have internalized these myths without even realizing it. So I had this conversation with this guy who's a Muslim and a neuroscientist and is now getting his MD, Mohammed Gilan, or Gilan. But he, as I talked to him, I had a conversation with him, right? And, I've always sort of had an awareness that, the Muslims, preserved a lot of this ancient Greek wisdom and they moved things forward and all that
Invented
sort of
the
stuff.
zero?
Yeah,
What a great invention. If you could invent one thing that would change the world, but also amount to nothing. I mean, that is the perfect Zen invention right there.
The hero invented zero. But so, I started trying to figure out, so we were talking about what is science really, right? And, the conclusion we sort of came to on the podcast is that it's a formalization of what human beings have always done. So humans change their minds in light of evidence, right? So if you look at, Game of Thrones is a great example, right? Season 5 ends, Jon Snow is dead, right? A lot of hypotheses emerge on the internet, right? People have theories about whether he's alive or dead or why. And then season 6 starts, right? New evidence is presented that, Jon Snow is in fact alive. Spoiler alert. And what that means...
Retroactive spoiler
alert. Sorry, guys. But, it emerges and then, people change their minds in evidence and, hypotheses are discarded. So humans have always done that sort of pattern recognition in light of evidence, but often the evidence isn't clear, right? It's fuzzy or the data is too complicated. You need statistical tools to, clarify what the signal is and what the noise is. People have a tendency to be intellectually dishonest, right? So we formalize this process of getting, the hypothesis out there. We make it so that it has to be tested, it has to be reproducible, it has to be tested by lots of people so that we're sure that this isn't just you sort of justifying your shitty idea. But in practice, as I looked at the scientific method and the evolution of that, turns out, you can look at it on Wikipedia, that the scientific method may have been developed by a Muslim, this guy Ibn Haytham, who I'd never heard of. And I realized that part of that is just the myths that we've heard about the West. And you think about it, we hear so much about the Greeks, right? And, we can all name Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and we hear so much about the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. And then there's this big missing gap where we're just sort of the Dark Ages, not much happened. Well, maybe not much happened in Europe, but there was a whole lot happening in the Middle East.
Right.
And so I realized that what I'd internalized is the underpants gnome view of intellectual progress. So did you know the underpants gnomes from South Park? It's great. It's one of my favorite episodes of all time. So the Cartman and Kyle and Stan, they keep having their underpants, or Tweak's underpants, keep getting stolen. So it's like the left sock thing. Where do all the left socks go? And so the boys decide to do a stakeout, right? And see who is taking the underpants. Turns out there are these gnomes that come out at night and steal the underpants. And so they're like, why are you doing this? Why would you possibly steal the underpants? And so the gnomes like whips out like a business presentation and says, very simple. Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, and there's a giant question mark. Step 3, profit. And that's the Western view of intellectual history. It's like, step 1, Greeks. Step 2,
whatever.
Yeah. Step 3, science. You know, and that's the view of history that I had, and I had internalized that myth without even realizing that there was a big hole in my mental game where I didn't understand what this middle process was. And you know, I have to like learn about that, but what it just all goes to validate this idea that, you know, Henrik talks about in The Secret of Our Success, which is that, you know, the famous Newton line of, if I have seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Not true at all. He says it's hobbits all the way down. It's these tiny, tiny little contributions that build up over time, and that's accumulated cultural evolution that happens because we have this prestige mechanism where we keep on copying from the people around each other better and better techniques and tools, and over time you develop a really, really powerful cultural evolutionary toolkit. Okay.
Cultural evolution, you and I were talking before we turned on the mics. There's that sticker on the fridge over there that says the what is it, the arc?
The long arc of history tends towards moral justice.
Right, it bends toward justice. The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And you said you believe that to be true.
Yep.
So, in a sense, at least on a cultural level, I guess, you would argue that evolution is progress. Because, you know, that's discredited to a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah.
But a lot of people aren't mixed mental artists, and they maybe haven't been exposed to a broad reading of the science.
Or conversely, maybe that sense that cultural evolution moves toward improvement is tied into the very bias that we're talking about toward presentism.
Maybe. I think...
Because you essentially would argue that today is better than any time in the past.
I think in some ways...
If cultural evolution is progress.
Well, I think you know, there's two things, right? So if we talk about pre-agriculture, hunter-gatherers, right? So that's... Our hardware works well at a size of 150, right? And those mechanisms work well. So
you just slithered right out of my trap.
I did. So I don't think that it's a straight line up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's been a you know, after agriculture, a huge drop.
Yep.
And then a staggering, slow advance back up to the point now where we're approaching where we were, depending on the metric, women's rights.
Yep.
Longevity, brain size, we're still way behind.
Yeah.
Overall health, way behind. You know, several important metrics were way behind. And also, we're talking about you and me, you know, privileged people with access to medical care and nutrition and all that. We're not talking about most of the people on the planet.
No, but I think that we've reached an important moment in history.
What's that?
I think we've reached the IQ revolution.
Okay, tell me.
So if you think about cultural, you know, there's an evolution.
Do you know your IQ, by the way?
No, I haven't had a test in a long time. Should we? Should we whip out an IQ test? Should we do it right
Whip
now?
it out. Whip it out.
Get out a Stanford Binet.
I had a weird thing with IQ.
Yeah.
I had a weird kind of relationship with it because when I was in, what was it, 6th grade maybe? 6th grade, I guess. Is that 14? Something like that?
Sounds plausible.
a grad student came to the school where I was and was just sitting in the back of the class observing whatever. And then he came, talked to my teacher, talked to me, came to my house, talked to my parents, and said he wanted to do this study of me for his master's or PhD or whatever, I don't know. And that guy followed me around for a month. In school, every class, lunch, sat at the table. When I was playing with my friends, playing hide and go seek and, you know, cowboys and Indians and whatever shit. And then he wrote this big, long paper about me. And my parents, being the cool, transparent people they are, said, well, of course, you can read this. It's about you. It's really, you know, interesting. And And they were really proud. So I was 14, probably going, you know, maybe 15 by then, and that's when we moved from Western Pennsylvania to Connecticut. And so it was a real big disruption for me, and scary, and losing all your friends. And I was moving from a place where I was clearly like the smartest kid in school to a place where I wasn't. Fairfield, Connecticut, there are a lot of smart kids. And Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania.
Not so much.
Not so much. And so it was, you know, in terms of ego, it was a difficult moment. And so I read this thing, and there was my IQ and my percentiles and my verbal and my mathematical and like all these numbers that I sort of wrapped myself in to protect my fragile little ego that was, you know, and for a long time I was hung up on it.
Yep.
So when we talk about IQ, I'm very, you know, it's a weird thing. It's like it's emotionally troublesome, I think, because you're quantifying something that is essentially unquantifiable. Maybe you'll disagree. That changes over time, changes in contexts, is reflected in many different ways in a life. And you can get, as I did, you can get trapped in it.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, anyway, so that was a long aside. Sorry, I interrupted
I think
you.
that's a super important aside. So do you know the history of the IQ test?
I remember reading, it wasn't meant as an intelligence measure. It
wasn't meant as a measure of fixed potential.
Right.
So it was originally developed by Alfred Binet, who was French, and it was designed to test what children's strengths and weaknesses were in different areas so that you could then come in and provide targeted support. And it was then hijacked by the eugenics movement.
Ah, look at that.
And specifically, it was hijacked by Louis Terman at Stanford. And back in 1909, Alfred Binet said that there are certain modern philosophers, right, this is 100 years ago, who have, you know, said that this is a measure of fixed potential and that they must react against this brutal pessimism and to prove that it is without foundation.
Wow.
Well, 100 years later, we have that evidence. But the idea that, you know, your IQ score measures what you're capable of becoming has become an idea that has become entrenched in our culture. And Carol Dweck at Stanford has spent the last 40 years trying to popularize the science that shows, you know, growth mindset. And she talks about the age of IQ, right, as this very sad period in educational history, where so many people came to believe that they had this fixed potential. And crucially, Terman did this experiment where he got a group of kids and he IQ tested them, and then decided that you know, he was going to use an IQ test to figure out who were the special ones and who would do well and who wouldn't. And then, you know, he thought that would predict their futures. And it did a terrible job. In the group of kids that he rejected, there were 2 Supreme Court justices. And if you read Dweck's book, you come to realize that the problem is exactly the problem that young Chris Ryan had, which is that you start to think that you're a special person, and you become very defensive and protective and unwilling to fail and unwilling to learn. And so this is a real problem. And the science that I most care about popularizing, the reason why I wrote The Straight-A Conspiracy, is to try and get that message out there. But, you know, diffusing that sort of understanding is difficult. And it's especially difficult when people like Sam Harris have on Charles Murray talking about the bell curve.
Right.
And crucially, if you want to displace Charles Murray's ideas, you actually have to move a lot of science. So that's actually what we're doing on Mixed Mental Arts this week, is that along with Kate Fogarty and Unicorn and Unikitty doing some of the visuals, we are breaking down the science of IQ to give people an understanding that A, it was hijacked by the eugenics movement, it was never meant to be a measure of fixed potential, that race is not a biologically useful concept, because it tells you it's not very predictive of sort of more genetic traits than just skin color, right? And Henrik gives the example of, if you take a person from West Africa and a person from New Guinea, they're both black, right, in terms of skin color, but they're from opposite ends of the human family tree.
Right. There's more genetic variation among Africans than the rest of the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's not.
So an Ethiopian and a fucking
Kenyan,
Angolan or something are totally different.
Yeah. So it's not a useful concept.
Yeah.
Right. So and then on top of that, the big thing is that there's this thing called the Flynn effect, which Murray actually helped name, which is that IQ scores keep going up over time across cultures. And in The Secret of Our Success, Henrik points out that if you gave someone an IQ test from 1815 and you gave them a modern IQ test, an average American, they would score 70. It would be borderline retarded. So IQ has gone up 30 points in the last 200 years.
Okay, wait a minute. Say that again. If you gave them an IQ test from 1870...
So if you took somebody from 1815 and you gave them a modern IQ test, then a person from 1815 using a modern IQ test would score 70.
Now, is that because there are concepts in the tests that that person would have been unfamiliar with?
Well, so what happens is that, this is the process of cultural accumulation. So, for example, let's look at the number system. You talked about 0, right? So, base 10 counting is an incredibly powerful counting system, right? It can do a lot of things. It's very versatile. If you look at most hunter-gatherer tribes, they don't have that base 10 system. They very often only have they count to 10 on their fingers, or, some of them some tribes in New Guinea count to 78, and they sort of work around their fingers, their knees, their elbows, and they do a couple of loops around. But as soon as they have contact with the base 10 system, they adopt it, because it's a more powerful system.
Not necessarily.
Well, maybe not necessarily, but some of them do, at least in Henrik's book. I'm not going to challenge you on hunter-gatherers and what hunter-gatherers do, because you're the king of that.
I'm the king of the hunter-gatherers.
Except the point of being the king of the hunter-gatherers is there is no king.
There's no king, exactly. I'll get an arrow in my back.
But so why look at the evolution of base 10 counting, and you find out that it's the result of this giant Eurasian hive mind, right? So 0 was invented in, I think, either the Middle East or India, right? You have other parts of the number system are invented elsewhere, and these ideas are passed back and forth across the Eurasian landmass,
right.
And you keep on accumulating a more and more powerful toolkit. And so we have the benefit of standing at the end of that long, long process of cultural accumulation. And so, now children learn their numbers, they learn their colors, they learn all these things at a younger and younger age, because we're bathed in much more culture.
But aren't we unavoidably testing for things that we recognize as being valuable in our culture? And therefore, it's nonsense to talk about someone from 100 years ago taking a test from today. Just as, we say, oh, this hunter-gatherer, you pluck him down in New York, you wouldn't know how to use the metro, he's stupid. Well, sure, plop you down in the Amazon and you're dead. So
I think there's the difference between, the human ability to upload a culture, right, is universal.
Right.
So, and yes, the IQ test is designed around measuring things that we find valuable, right, in our environment, right? My IQ, the example I give also is you can go to the Amazon where I will die, and essentially my IQ is 0, right, or very, very low, right? But you can also just put me in a boxing class, right, where I'm not able to make intelligent choices, right? I, bob when I should weave, I, jab when I should hook, right? I'm not comfortable in that environment, and so I don't make good choices. And this gets down to what is intelligence, which is a super basic question. And intelligence, I think the Romans nailed it, right? So the word intelligence comes from the Roman root interlegere, to choose between. It's the wisdom to know the difference. So do you bob when you should bob? Do you duck when you should duck? Do you weave when you should weave, right? Can you tell the difference between the fruit that is edible and the fruit that is poisonous, right? So I don't have that intelligence in an Amazonian context. So the point is that and as you're saying, yes, intelligence definitely depends on environment and whether you have the cultural toolkit that is adapted to that environment.
And that cultural toolkit can become more refined, I think we're seeing now in sort of cutting edge evolutionary research, can become more refined through epigenetic activation. And there's Darwinian selection, and then there's giraffes' necks get longer because they're reaching. Yeah, Lamarckian. Lamarck is having a resurgence now, where scientists are seeing that actually by using certain capacities, it does, in some cases at least, it seems that it does endow offspring with increased capacity for those same capacities.
Yep. And I mean,
I
crucially,
said capacity too many times there.
You can never say it too many. Your capacity for capacity is truly limitless.
Capacity squared. It's an order of magnitude. Anytime someone uses the phrase order of magnitude, I want to slap them.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you ever find that people who are a little bit kinky just say order of magnitude around you in the hopes of getting slapped?
I've got my paddle in my head. Don't you get
order
up
of magnitude. But yeah, I mean, and that's the point of multi-level selection, is that evolution is happening at every level, right? It's happening at a genetic level, an epigenetic level, cultural level, and then there's culture-gene coevolution.
Right.
So, the point is that does everybody have lactose persistence?
Yeah.
No, not everybody does.
Right.
Oh, guess what? It's the people who, were raising cattle and whatever.
Right.
But, Dawkins and Harris deny this. And why do they deny this? Do they deny this because the evidence is unclear? I mean, that's the point. I think that if you, go out and read, the work of someone like Joe Henrich, that the evidence is pretty clear, but they have become sort of tribally or ideologically entrenched, or alternatively, and this is the exciting thing is of this whole Sam Harris thing, is that it's clear that Sam hasn't even read the book. Because he had Charles Murray on, and they talked about the Flynn effect, and they couldn't explain why the Flynn effect was happening. And if you read Joe Henrich's The Secret of Our Success, which was one of the books that I was holding up as like evidence, it's very clear why the Flynn effect has been happening. So it's clear that Sammy didn't do his homework, and that he just sort of blindly, emotionally reacted against what he saw as a perceived threat to his social status, which is what humans do.
Right, we all do it.
We all do it, and it's totally understandable. But in the end, the point is that what I care about is science. And I care about, sort of the movement forward of the scientific project. And you have to get that evidence out into the public eye so the public can read it, decide for themselves.
Right.
And really what I want is to move science away from something that is sequestered in the ivory tower to something that everybody engages with and is trying to understand and make sense of, and discussing these ideas and figuring out how do they practically apply to your lives. And they do.
Okay, so that brings us to an interesting question
in
terms of how these things practically apply to our lives. It seems that we're in agreement that progress in terms of things getting better. I don't know that we really got to the bottom of whether the arc of the moral universe.
Oh, well, I think we can get to that now.
Right.
We can get to that
All right,
right now.
Let's get to that now, and then we'll get back to what I was thinking about.
So let's think about this transition from hunter-gatherer, right? Where it's within our Dunbar number, right? We all know everybody in the village, and we're pretty good at policing defectors. We're good at people, Joe Rogan called this person Aaaand, right? So there's this guy Aaaand. We all go out and collect guavas, and then Aaaand eats all the fucking guavas and, doesn't pull his weight, right? But we're good at 150 people at spotting Aaaand and being like, Aaaand, you're a fucking shithead.
Yeah.
Do your part.
Aaaand doesn't get laid.
Aaaand doesn't get laid. Exactly, because Aaaand doesn't have prestige.
Yeah.
So it's actually in Aang's interest to contribute to the group and to acquire prestige and acquire social power by being more useful to the group than anybody else.
Right.
So that's at 150. But then there's this traumatic event I think you would agree, that is the invention of agriculture, where suddenly you start to get these large-scale societies, and we don't have the cultural toolkit to be able to make sense of an environment in which there are 100,000, 1 million people in a city.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that these easy mechanisms of control around dominance develop. And crucially, in all these civilizations, a god is created. So a figure of such awe and such power that is the pharaoh,
right,
or an actual god,
right,
or some sort of iconic figure that just generates blind obedience.
Right, with restricted access.
With restricted access is the key thing. Nobody gets to go behind the curtain and see that there is no wizard.
Right.
Because if you did, then you would shatter the illusion. So what happens then, though, is that, you start to get societies that are better and better. You've now created a problem, which is that the pharaoh, the emperor, is unaccountable. And that fucks with human psychology. So you become, and we know now from Dacher Keltner at UC Berkeley, that you become more impulsive and less empathetic. That's what that much power does to human psychology.
I love his research.
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the research where he gets two people, random people from the campus, sets them down at a Monopoly board. One of them gets 2 dice. One gets 1 die. One starts with $500. One starts with $100. One starts with a hotel already on Boardwalk or whatever. And then they play. Of course, the rich one wins. He knows it was a flip of a coin, and then they interview them about the game, and the guy who won will talk about his fucking strategy and how smart he is and how he knew if he did this, then that would work out. Well, it's unbelievable how we backfill our story to justify our success,
of course,
when it's pure fucking luck.
Well, but
or a setup.
But this is the old, because my dad was a city banker, right? And that's the oldest thing in the world. This is that, when the market, when I win at the market, I'm a genius. And when I lose, it's, market forces, bad luck, some sort of externalized thing. So that's the stories. Or the other one that I love about my favorite, if we're playing the game, what's your favorite Dacher Keltner research?
Oh, man. No wonder we're not invited to more cocktail parties.
Well, I don't know. I'd like to do a cocktail party with Yumi and Dacher Keltner. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, I'd love
Dacher's great. I've had Dacher on the podcast multiple times.
I wrote a long time ago. I actually sent him an email, but he never got back to me. But this was
I'll put you guys
3
in touch.
years ago.
I'll put you guys in touch because he's amazing.
I'd love to talk to him. Yeah.
And we started doing, one of the fun things we started doing is we started pairing him. Well, I mean, not just him, but we started pairing up scientists to try and encourage exactly that kind of interdisciplinary research. And we did an amazing one with Dacher Keltner and Darren Asimoglu of Why Nations Fail, just to understand, from the level of personal psychology to the societal level, how does it. It's great. Just like such a fun conversation.
I interrupted your train of thought, though. Where were you going?
Well, I was going to say let me just give my favorite Dacher Keltner study. Yeah. So it was the one with the luxury cars.
Oh, who stops and who doesn't when an old lady's waiting across the street. At the stop sign, if you're in a BMW or a Mercedes, you blast through.
So more impulsive, less empathetic. So crucially, that's the experience of the pharaohs and the emperors.
Speaking of empathy, did you see this research that just was published a few days ago showing that people who take ibuprofen are less empathetic?
Really?
Yeah.
But Tylenol people are... Really?
Or maybe I got it mixed up. Maybe it's ibuprofen or acetaminophen, I forget.
Whatever it is,
It's the one of the non-aspirin painkillers. They did this test where they had the control group taking placebo, and then they had the other group taking the painkiller, and they were asked to judge how much someone was suffering in a photograph, and there was a backstory. They just had a bike accident or they were getting surgery. And the ones who had taken the painkiller rated the suffering of the other one lower. So they were less empathetic to other people suffering when they had taken this painkiller. Really interesting finding, no?
That is amazing.
Yeah. So it blocks, it's like blocking pain on a conceptual level. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, real interesting. Which, I mean, compare that to marijuana, which some people use for pain control, but it doesn't hurt less. It just helps you sort of frame it in a way that isn't as disturbing. Yeah. So I wonder what that does to their sense of empathy,
I don't know.
It's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. So you get
Dasher can. Okay, we covered that.
Then what happens is that you start to evolve mechanisms for holding these dictators, essentially, which is what pharaohs and emperors are, accountable.
Right.
So you get rule of law, you get the Glorious Revolution, you get these key.
That took a long time.
Long ass time.
And also, interestingly, the best example of it, most people would say, is the United States. Mm-hmm.
The rule of law comes before the
Magna Carta and all that. Yeah, but the divided government, the sort of balance of powers and all that. But the origins of that.
It was from Rome.
Well, yeah, I guess there was a Senate in Rome. Yeah.
Well, and originally you have to distinguish between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire.
Right.
And so they used to have pretty good mechanisms of accountability, and part of the reason why Rome goes off the rails is because those mechanisms of accountability, those branches become less and less important, and you essentially end up with an executive that is unaccountable to the other branches of government.
And there was a Mitch McConnell figure, I'm sure.
Yeah,
that guy.
Well, these archetypes and these patterns repeat again and again.
Yeah.
But the key is that it's about mechanisms of accountability, and mechanisms of accountability at the level of Aaaand and a tribe of 150 are easy. That's easy for our brain. When you get to the level of a society, and that's the point, it's not just that you have to figure out those mechanisms of accountability at the level of the United States. We're now having to figure out mechanisms of accountability at a global level, right? Technology
and we're failing. And let's be honest about it.
We are failing.
So that brings me back to what I was going to say a few minutes ago when you were talking about your allegiance to science and trying to find what are the practical applications of these scientific findings and da-da-da-da-da. And I wanted to sort of challenge you a little bit in the sense that, are you convinced that science has or will improve human life?
I think it can, but I think it can. But the key thing is that you have to understand. So if we can do it because we can help people become more intelligent. We can help people
more intelligent.
We can help people raise their IQs faster than at any time in history before.
But aren't you using IQ in the very sense that...
Well, in terms of making decisions, right? So let me give you an example, a practical, tangible example, right?
Right.
So there's this idea, Descartes' error, right? And, some people believe that reason and emotion are separate, right? And the point of the work of people like John Haidt and Antonio Damasio and Daniel Kahneman is that thinking and feeling are always linked.
Always linked. I don't know. I mean, my understanding of their research is that we make decisions emotionally and then we use the thinking to justify them later.
That's right. But there's always some sort of emotion that's driving our thinking.
Right.
Right? And then we can reflect and change the emotion in light of the evidence. Right?
Change the emotion in light of the evidence.
Change the feeling in response to the facts.
I'm not sure. If that's true, it's true in a limited sense.
Well, so let me give you an example from my own work with students. Okay?
I know intellectually there's nothing wrong with eating dog.
Yeah.
But it would be almost impossible for me to eat a dog.
Because of how you feel about dogs.
Yeah. Right. That's what I'm saying. My feeling isn't changing based upon my knowledge.
Well, no, but
people get to me all the time and they're like, "Yeah, I read Sex at Dawn, great book, but my wife's not fucking anyone else." Like, okay, fair enough.
But you don't have to change it. You can change it.
Well, I don't think you can. I think it's really hard.
Let me ask you,
because I think they're disconnected. Those things.
If you were starving to death,
yeah.
And the only thing to eat, for some reason, this is an environment where there's no food except
I know
for
someone who's been in that
lot
case.
Of dog.
I met a couple who were in that situation. They were hiking in the Himalayas in India with their border collie.
Yeah.
And a sudden snowstorm kicked up. They got caught in a cave. They were there 4 days. They were starving. And the guy told me the story, and his wife was there, and he was like, I couldn't. And I was like, I know where this story's going. He's like, dude, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And we looked at her and she's like, I killed it.
Yeah.
She killed it. She's Indian. She's hardcore. Captain Dan and Shaku.
But
that's not intellectual. That's not that my thinking is saying, oh, well, justify. That's I'm fucking starving. The feeling itself changed organically.
Exactly, right? But, or for example, so let me give you an example, right?
Do you ever have...
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to keep interrupting you.
No, it's
but
okay.
I'm thinking of an example of this. Like, I'm essentially agnostic, probably, but I imagine if the shit hit the fan suddenly and deeply, I might pray.
Right.
Like,
do I pray? Is that the question?
Have you ever been in a situation like a car accident, or you hear like someone close to you is dying or something? Do you turn? Do you like, oh please? Like, do you find yourself appealing to something that intellectually, isn't there?
I think of pretty much everything as a tool. That's how I think of everything. So I don't have a problem with praying if it's a useful tool, right? So let me give you. So I had this is a conversation you'll love. Okay. So I had a conversation last week with a Maori guy, right? And he said, we think of, we worship the mountains or we worship the rivers and we call them like characters, right? So they have names, right? And we think that they have spirits. And he's like, that's not woo-woo and mystical. It's just that when you personify mountains and lakes and rivers, they become people to you. And because you feel that they are people, you take care of them. So it's actually just environmentalism and stewardship and all of that. It's a very practical tool. And, Shintoism has the same thing. And so these a lot of these religious things have pro-social benefits. So it's a tool. So the point is that, I have no problem, but a lot of it is, do you remember that that's a fiction that you've created, or do you forget that that's a fiction you've created and start to, be terrified of the mountain, right? Which maybe if the fear is, I'm terrified of the mountain because I know that if I go up there I may get killed, maybe it's still useful.
Or maybe it's a volcano.
Or maybe it's a volcano.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be Joe. You don't want to fall into the volcano or get thrown into the volcano.
We're not talking about Joe Rogan, by the way.
No, we're talking about the amazing Tom Hanks movie.
Oh,
yeah. There's Tom Hanks, Joe versus the volcano.
Yeah.
Which I don't actually remember very well.
No, I don't either. One of Tom Hanks's more forgettable films, perhaps.
But so in the same way, like I don't have a problem with praying, right? If you're using it as a form of coping, right?
Yeah.
If it helps you get you through there in the same way.
I was trying to get at whether there's an emotional trigger that supersedes intellect, because I'm feeling. If I understand your argument, you're saying that they're always linked. Feeling and thinking are always linked, and of course they are. Everything's linked within us. But I feel like
but I don't
feeling
think everybody
overrides
thinks that way.
Thinking.
I think in general, that's the point of Haidt's work, right? Yeah. The rational dog and its emotional tail, or
and fast and slow
emotional
thinking,
dog
right?
and the rational tail,
Yeah.
So in general, most of this is driven by feeling, but you do have the ability to think slow. You have the ability to reflect,
right?
And when you reflect, you have the ability to change your feelings.
And that's what we're saying about doubt, the humility of doubt.
That's right.
To be like, this feels right, but...
Is it?
Do you know the expression, to fly by the seat of your pants?
Yes, I do.
Do you know where it comes from? Like
no, I do not.
It's cool. I was with my uncle flying. He's a pilot. And we were talking about trusting your instruments. Mm-hmm. And he explained, flying by the seat of your pants is when you're flying and you get into a bank of clouds. Mm-hmm. And the air is moving in ways that can mimic gravity. So if you get caught in like an air current, your sense of up and down shifts because you're moving in a certain way and you compensate in the airplane. So now your sense of down isn't pointing toward Earth directly, it's at an angle because it's compensating for the wind. So that's why it's so important that you trust your instruments even when your bodily sensation is telling you something different. If you fly by the seat of your pants, meaning how much pressure you're feeling on your ass against the chair,
that's amazing. That's
how you do a Kennedy and you fly right into the fucking ocean.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So flying by the seat of... I always thought it meant like going quickly or carelessly, but no, it's ignoring science,
empirical data.
That's
right.
In favor of what feels right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's the point is that, why, I think the more basic question is, why do we have science? And we have science because essentially our emotional intuitions, our experiential sense is often we are flying by the seat of our pants, and that is unreliable.
So is science a superior way of experiencing the universe?
No, I think science is just a way of breaking your beliefs faster.
But does that lead you to a better... See, I think one of the tensions in my work is I'm always aware, I'm trying to be aware of, okay, what is better for human beings as organisms versus what is better for human beings as a hive versus what is better for whatever this emergent intelligence, which I don't like to use that word because it presupposes a positive quality to it, but this emergent entity that we're embedded within, which I think is very tied up with science and technology, whose agenda appears to be indifferent at best to our agendas as individuals. You see what I'm saying? So, for example, what's happening right now in the world, we've got the robotics revolution, we've got the AI revolution, we've got, technology,
genetics,
all this. I look at those things and everyone's saying, look at that, advancements of science, it's so amazing, it's so wonderful. Or, sending rockets off to Mars and colonizing Mars. I look at those things and I say, none of those things are good for us. None of those things are making my life better or your life better. And of course, we have titanium knee replacements. But all those things, if you look at them, they're all patches on something that's fucked up by the industrial world. So it's like, we're making progress in fighting cancer. What causes cancer? What causes cancer is this industrial shit that you're pumping into the atmosphere that we're all breathing and drinking and eating that mutates our fucking cells and causes this runaway cancer. I think it's all a fucking scam. And so I keep stepping back and saying, how is this better for us?
Well, I think it's that we've developed unevenly, right? So Joe Rogan, not Joe versus the volcano.
Yeah. Joe Rogan would kick that volcano's ass.
That is probably true. But, Joe talked about how, the internet is in its adolescence, right? And I think that's very much what's happened. The analogy that I always use is dueling, right? So, dueling was a thing that existed for a long time. People fought to first blood, and then guns show up. And then, suddenly there's this bloodbath. Because suddenly fighting to first blood is a whole different thing.
Right.
So, in the same way, our technology has raced ahead of our understanding, right? And, everybody has a microphone now, and everybody can now say whatever they're thinking. But most people have never really had to, have this level of self-awareness. They've never had to, engage in sort of epistemology. How do I know what I know? Right. Do I really know?
But the premise there is that the internet will grow up. It will mature.
Humanity will grow up.
Well, okay, let me push back on that, because what you're saying is that humanity has to catch up with technology. Einstein famously said after the atom was split, like, everything's changed except the way we think, right? I think the nature of technology, as you've described it, being this enterprise that is fed by the fragmented intelligences of many people and many cultures and all that, so you get this thing, this result of all that input, is by its nature always going to be out of the control of the organisms that created it.
Why?
Because it's operating at a higher level, because it's the result of all this collaborative, cumulative intelligence. So the anthill will never be comprehensible to any ant.
Well, I think that's definitely true. I think the point is that this global society is now far too complex for any individual to understand.
And technology is too complex for any individual to understand. Neither you nor I know how this iPad right in front of us works.
That is correct.
And we never will, we never could. And there's probably no individual human being on the planet who understands every element of this thing that we use all the time.
That is correct.
So therefore, technology is always beyond the grasp of any of us, and certainly of the vast majority of us. And so I guess what I'm saying is there will always be this lag between the technology and the individual. So if the idea is, well, the internet, we're going to mature and then we'll know how to use it perfectly, maybe.
Well, I'm not
but
saying
when
that
we do, there will be other technology that's way beyond us.
there may always be a gap, but look at, for example, the atomic bomb, right? You know, the atomic bomb ushered in this long peace, right? We've lived in this long peace.
What long peace?
Well, I mean, listen, do you agree with Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature?
Fuck no.
No, I know you don't. So there you go.
Long peace. Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, like most of his work that's not about linguistics,
right,
in my opinion, is totally intellectually unbalanced and questionable.
Right.
You know, he defines violence
right
as in a very, very limited way.
Right.
When it comes to modern examples of it, he doesn't talk about dictatorships. He doesn't talk about all the people who were disappeared in Chile and Argentina. And he doesn't talk about El Salvador, the death squads. None of that counts. He's just World War II. Where white people like us were fighting and dying. He doesn't. The rape of Manchuria, the rape of Nanking, that doesn't enter into his calculations. What? I mean, there's millions of people there.
Right.
Cambodia, Rwanda. No, that's not war. That's genocidal, whatever.
Right.
I mean, I may be wrong on these individual examples, but isn't that nice?
Yeah, that is nice.
That's my phone.
Should I vamp?
Vamp, yeah. That's mine.
Should I rant out of my ass?
Rant out your ass. That's so now everyone hears my ringtone is Hey 19.
It's a pretty good ringtone.
Steely Dan.
Yeah, it doesn't get better than that.
You gotta love the Dan.
But, I think, so let me ask you this, right? So
sorry for that interruption, folks. I'm sure I'll forget to edit that out.
No, but I think that's good. That's authenticity.
That's authenticity. This is coming to you raw. This is a handcrafted podcast.
Exactly. It's an artisan.
Handcrafted. I mean, you know how everything's fucking handcrafted.
It's amazing.
This is a handcrafted beer.
But
what are you talking about?
But you should be excited about this. This is really like
it's
the global
bullshit.
Village. The global village. Everything's going to be handcrafted. Handcrafted podcasts.
No, nothing will be handcrafted. It'll just be branded as handcrafted.
Okay.
It's all fucking lies.
Yeah. But don't you think that, don't you think that social intelligence is figuring that out? Don't you think that,
No.
You're not the only one who's having these thoughts that a lot of that shit is lies?
No, I don't think we're figuring it out. I think that what's happening is that we're just layering bullshit onto bullshit, and each layer is it's just like a fresh coat of paint on a rusted fucking chassis.
So let's talk about the rusted chassis.
Right. The rusted chassis is, getting back to our earlier conversation, we don't know each other. There's no reputational damage, so you can get away with bullshit. You can sell crap that looks good. You can sell poison to children and call it Fruit Loops. And as long as you make money on it, then it's fine.
But see, the point is that in the same way as, within the small village of 150, we try and hold Aaaand accountable on his actions and his behavior, right? We now have the ability to hold each other accountable on our bullshit. So, for example, I've been holding Sam Harris accountable on his bullshit.
But nobody's holding General Mills accountable for all the sugary...
Some people are.
Oh, no, they're not.
Some people are. But large part of what this requires, right, is that what does it require to not get sold lemon, right? Like a shitty car by a secondhand salesman who sells you a rusted chassis, paints it up, does the whole thing.
Right.
It requires intelligence, right? So I am easy to dupe at a secondhand car salesman.
Right.
Because I know shit about cars.
So now we've got apps that'll tell you whether this guy's trustworthy, and you get... There's definitely cool stuff happening, but my point is that we're never going to catch up.
Well, we may never catch up. I'm okay with that. But the point is that we at least can keep in lockstep and be closer. I think we may have, because my background is education. That's what I care about the most. And a lot of what this comes down to is that, mental tools need to be shaped, right? So Descartes' error, the idea that thinking and feeling are always linked. This may be obvious to Chris Ryan, but I'll tell you that to a lot of humanity, it is not obvious.
It's because I have a really high IQ.
But you are off the charts, Chris.
I'm off the fucking charts.
And the problem is that,
I've seen the charts.
And you're an early adopter, right? So in many ways, you've been exposed to a lot of this science that most people have never been exposed to. They don't understand how to think these things through. So for example, Isaiah Gooley, who is maybe your biggest fan, wrote a whole thing about Chris Ryanism, where he's defined a philosophy for you.
Who?
Exactly. So Isaiah is somebody in the mixed martial arts community, and he's been writing. He started off writing about Chengyu, which are like these little Chinese sayings, right? But then it sort of like veered into basically just his, loving of Chris Ryan and how awesome Chris Ryan is because you changed his life.
I did.
You changed his life.
Well, that's good, I guess, if I changed it in a good direction.
In a positive way.
Oh.
So he was in Afghanistan and we started listening to a lot of...
His name's Isaiah?
Isaiah Gooley, yeah. And he started listening to a lot of Tangentially Speaking. Oh. And that, Sex at Dawn, a few other things changed his life. But you had a profound impact on him.
Was he in the military?
Yeah, he was in the military.
Did he desert?
No.
Did he frag his...
He may have deserted, but I don't think that he deserted.
Oh, rice pudding deserted.
He rice pudding, yeah. But yeah, you had a profound impact on his life, and he talks about how Chris Ryanism, right, which is this sort of understanding of our humanity, and that it's okay to be human, in all the variety and complexity that it is in many ways the progenitor of what we're doing with mixed mental arts. Oh. And it's just because you had exposure to a lot of this science before a lot of people did. And I think that's the point is that, most people have not had access to a lot of these ideas. And the more we democratize and make people understand how humanity works, the more people are going to be like, oh, that's a more authentic, satisfying experience. And that's a better product than a lot of the commercial bullshit that's being sold. And people will choose that.
Maybe.
They will adopt that innovation. But we have to package it and make it accessible.
Yeah.
And we have to make it clear that a lot of the shit that is sold as science is not Shinola.
But it is Shinola, right? Because we don't know shit from Shinola. Oh, Shinola's the good stuff.
Shinola's the good stuff.
Yeah. I thought I was getting a deal when I bought the shit. That's good shit.
No, that's good shit.
That's good shit. That's not Shinola.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's an ambiguous saying.
Okay, two things I wanted that came up, and I'm just throwing them out. We don't have to talk about them right now. It's just so I don't have to take notes.
Yeah.
Philip K. Dick, do you know his quote where he says, "Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't disappear."
Yeah. I don't know the quote, but I would agree with that.
Okay, so let's get back to that. And then the other thing I wanted to, just a place marker, Spandrels, acceptation. You familiar with that concept? Mm-hmm. That's an interesting concept.
It's a great
Stephen
concept.
Jay Gould. Yeah, of course you would know that.
Well, I actually got it recently from listening to, there was a Columbus meetup for mixed mental arts, and they did a podcast. And there's a guy, Adam Hansen, who works in innovation. That's what he studies, is innovation. And the degree to which so much of innovation is acceptation.
Yeah. That's the essay right there. That's why I was reminded of it.
Oh, really?
On top of that stack is the original essay. Gould and Leventon, I think, or Lewinton. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. There it is. Proceedings of the Royal Society of London.
Yep.
When was this published? 79.
Yep.
The Evolution of Acceptation by Natural Selection. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's tell people what it is, basically. If there's a good quote, I'll read it here.
Well, the example that...
here it is.
Oh, go for it.
One must not confuse the fact that a structure is used in some way with the primary evolutionary reason for its existence and confirmation. And what he talks about is... and here this gets to your thing. Adaptation, a good fit of organisms to their environment, can occur at 3 hierarchical levels with different causes. This is back in 79, and people are finally coming around. Some people are coming around to understanding that this is true. So he talks about a church in San Marco in Italy that he's visiting, and he looked at the arches in the church, and of course, the walls are straight, the ceiling is straight, so there's a 90-degree angle where the walls meet the ceiling, but the arches, being arches, leave this sort of triangular curved section between the corners and the arch, and there are these beautiful structures that were sculpted into that, and it looks like they're there to hold up the ceiling. It looks like they have a functional purpose for being there, but in fact it's just a space that needed to be filled in.
That's right.
And so it led to this brilliant line of thinking where in biological adaptation, things exist in our bodies and we make the mistake. People always do this with me. They're like, well, then what's the evolutionary reason for this? And why is that there? And we assume that every facet of our bodies and our minds has some evolutionary purpose. Well, of course, men are jealous because in the caveman days they had to do, and we make up these stories that seem to explain things, but in fact, they may not be things, like the chin.
Right.
A strong chin is important for blah, blah, blah. A chin is just a place where two parts of the jawbone join. Right. And a chin is not a thing.
Right.
In a biological sense, it's a thing in a conceptual sense.
Right.
And those two things those two ways of thinking don't map 100%. So anyway, that's my explanation of acceptation.
Well, and, the example that Adam Hansen gave, which is a good one, is that, feathers may have originally evolved for heat loss,
regulation, yeah.
But then ultimately they came to be used for flying.
Right, because so one of the big mysteries of evolution is how did something like feathers and wings, also wings, how did they develop? Because until they developed to a certain point, it couldn't have been gradual. Until they developed to a certain point, you can't fly.
Right.
And you have to have very light bones. The body has to be... So it's not like... It can't possibly have been a gradual development because you could never have reached the point where it became useful.
Right.
So that's a big mystery in evolution. So that's where this way of thinking really helps a lot, because you say, well, the wings probably develop when you hold them up, then the body can respirate, and heat loss is much better. So it became, a night-day heat loss thing.
I also just love this. This is like a Frenchman.
See, yeah, this is for you Patreon sponsors. You get to see me make these wing motions.
And if you're right now only listening to the podcast and not seeing it, don't you want to lay down some cash so you can see it?
For as little as $1 a month, you can see Chris Ryanism in action. I can't believe that Chris Ryanism is a thing.
Yeah, no, it's branded as a whole worldview. A Weltanschauung.
A Weltanschauung.
There's always a great German word for everything. Gemütlich.
Gemütlich. Yeah, that's a good one.
Or gezellig in Dutch. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the other thing we were talking about?
So we were talking about acceptation, and then the...
Oh, Philip K. Dick. Okay.
Philip K. Dick, yeah.
So I've been thinking about that, because when I first read that, I wrote it down. I thought that was a really interesting thing. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't disappear.
Or to phrase it in terms of the 90s, reality bites.
And you feel it.
That's right.
And it leaves a mark.
It leaves a mark.
So, okay, but... the more I think about that, the less aligned I am with it.
Ooh.
Because it ignores and in fact aggressively dismisses, I would say, an element of reality which is reality, but which only exists when you believe in it.
Okay.
Love.
Well, that's emotional reality.
It's reality. Okay, let's not talk about emotional reality. That I think I could argue that, but I'll make it even easier on myself, which is part of Chris Ryanism. It's a central tenet.
Are you guys getting this down?
It's a core tenet of Chris Ryanism. So make it as easy on yourself as you possibly can. Or, I get all arrogant about it. Lao Tzu argued that if you choose the battlefield, you've already won the battle.
By the way, Isaiah Gooley will love that.
Is he into Lao Tzu?
Well, he's a Chinese linguist.
Lao Tzu.
Lao Tzu. I butcher Chinese regularly. So yeah.
Placebo.
Okay.
It exists when you believe in it. When you don't believe in it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
So it is reality. There are thousands of experiments proving that it is. It's even experiments that aren't about placebo prove it is, because they always compensate for placebo effect. But, when you take away the belief, that element of reality disappears.
So let me give you another example.
So fuck Philip K. Dick.
Oh, I don't think so. I think Philip K. Dick is right.
Oh, Philip K. Dick's going to fuck me.
Yeah, I think Philip K. Dick is going to stick his Philip K. Dick inside of you.
My Philip K. Dick there.
Is it that long?
my mic cord.
So let's go back. Let's tie this all back, right?
No, I just have big feet.
You do? Which is the same thing as saying I have a big Philip K. Dick. But so let's tie it all back to Ignaz Semmelweis. So did they believe that Ignaz Semmelweis was right about this hand washing thing? No, they didn't. Did that mean that stopped being true? Germs still existed.
Well, but wait, you're taking Philip K. Dick's thing and arguing the inverse.
Am I?
I'm not saying that it's not true as far as it goes. I'm saying it's not a complete expression because it rejects that part of reality that is predicated upon belief.
I think, right? So we're part of reality. Human beings exist in reality, right?
Yeah.
And, there are our beliefs, right? And our beliefs are, this is what they call naive realism or Maya, right? Our beliefs create a sort of perception of reality. And then there is some sort of feedback between what we believe and, whatever is happening physically in our body, right? So I believe that, for example, somebody loves me, right? That creates an emotional experience. There is a chemical experience.
Right.
That creates physical manifestations.
Exactly.
There are consequences of that.
Right.
But that all exists. We all exist within reality, this larger thing. And, the point is that those rules of reality, whatever they are, which we keep on forming better and better stories about over time, is...
Are they better and better?
In some senses, they're better. I think so, yeah.
But see, you reflexively return to this progressivist worldview that things are getting better and better overall. And I keep calling you back on it because I don't think, for example, that our way of thinking about mountains and rivers is better than the Maori way. I think it's far inferior.
I think it's far
to the
inferior.
point where we're destroying ourselves.
That's right. So the when I say better, right? So there's the Western view, right? This sort of, which is the consequence of this atomistic or logical view, which is that history is a line and it's a straight line and all of that, right? I don't believe that, right?
But you do think the line is moving upwards.
Well, and then there's the Chinese view, which is that history is cyclical.
Right.
I think that the model is some combination of the two.
Like a spiral.
It's a spiral.
But you do believe that things are getting better.
I believe that the long arc of history tends towards moral justice.
Then the last 10,000 years have been an aberration.
I think that's the big question that I have for you, right? Is that, why was there this shift towards agriculture? Like they didn't, the point is that clearly they lost a lot. They didn't know the trade that they were making, and they didn't know what they were losing.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of giving away one of the most interesting chapters of this book that will someday come out, if I don't die. If I do die, will you take it over? It's right there.
Listen,
it's right there. See those papers?
Not only will I take it over, but I guarantee you that Isaiah Gooley would be honored.
Isaiah, you guys can co-publish it.
We will co-publish it, and we will get Chris Ryanism out into the world. The last will and testament of Chris Ryanism.
Please, if I keel over, someone just, it's we will just carry me, drag me across the finish line.
We will.
But anyway, because that's a pivotal question, and I get asked it all the time, and it's difficult to answer. But there is an answer. It's just complicated. The way it's normally phrased is, if agriculture is so bad, why did we choose it? Why did our ancestors choose it? You talked about earlier, used the phrase the invention of agriculture, and I was going to call you on it, and I thought, fuck it.
Because no
let him
individual...
go. Let him go.
I understand.
It wasn't invented. So... All right, there's a story that I think encapsulates this. It's a true story. There were some tourists in Sonoma Valley, and they got up early. They were going to take a sunrise balloon ride over the vineyards, and they were in the parking lot. They were setting up the hot air balloon, and the balloon was tied down. They were filling it up with air, and it was sort of half inflated. And a breeze kicked up just as they were untying it and sort of positioning it, and it started pulling the balloon away. It was getting away from the balloon wranglers, and one of the tourists jumped in and grabbed the basket to help them hold on to it. And it got away, and all the pros let go, because if you work with balloons, you never let both feet leave the ground.
Right.
This guy was just trying to help out. He didn't know. He held on, and he started rising up above the parking lot. And until he was up 300 or 400 feet, and he finally let go and died, right? And so you might say, as the sheriff did, like, what was he thinking?
He wasn't.
Well, he was, but what he was thinking was, when he was 10 feet off the ground, he was thinking the same thing he was thinking when he was 200 feet off the ground, which was, shit, it's too late now. I should have let go before. So I think that's what agriculture is. Agriculture is a ratcheting system where and the thing that shows it wasn't an invention, it didn't spread, it at least, historians differ on this, but most people say it arose at least 7 times independently. Others, I've seen it argued as many as 12 times. So in different parts of the world, it arose at different times, but the climactic context seems to have always been the same, which was that there was an unusually rich period of rainfall. So human population, just like rabbits or birds or anything else, responds to fluctuations in the plenitude of the environment. Now, we're special because we eat so many different kinds of things, and we're very adaptive. And so when there's no rabbits, we can eat squirrels, and when there are no squirrels, we can eat mollusks, and we can eat all sorts of things. But our populations were in alignment with the environment, just like every other animal. So you get a period of particularly rich rains. The environment becomes very rich. Then the rains stop. Oh, okay. Then suddenly there's starvation. So normally people die. Kids die. Right? But in these cases, someone figured out, like, wait a minute. We dig a trench from the stream to these nut trees, and the nut trees will stay alive. I think the first steps, and there's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no way to argue this one way or the other, but I think the first step was bringing water to an area that had been full of food. And then once they did that, it was like, oh, holy shit, we can manipulate this, we can control this. But once you do that, then you're a hero. You save lives. People aren't dying. Those kids aren't dying who otherwise would be dying. Wonderful. Oh, now we need more people. Have more kids, because now we have more food. Then we have more kids. Then we have more food. Then we have and then you get hierarchy. Then you get the whole fucking disaster. Or what's the line in Zorba the Greek? The whole catastrophe. He said, I've got a wife, kids, the whole catastrophe. So I think, that's what happened. Nobody ever chose agriculture. There was a crisis. This seemed like the smartest way out of it. Somebody figured it out. It made sense. And when you think about, so much of technological development is like that. We invent our way out of a fucking mess, only to find that now we're in an even deeper mess.
But see, I think that's the nature of progress.
Progress?
I think
if the mess is getting deeper, that ain't progress.
Well, I think the point. So, for example, the famous thing about that the car solved pollution, right? Because there were all these horse-drawn buggies. They were shitting all over the street. Shit was piled up in the streets. And at a low level, right, when you have a few motor cars, yes, it's a massive reduction in pollution.
Right.
But then at scale, it becomes a problem.
Right.
And so now you have a new problem, and now you have to innovate and solve around that. And so we've already seen that. First we swapped out the form of locomotion, right, from a horse to an engine, right? Then, leaded petrol became problematic. Now we have to swap that out, right? And now, there's this whole problem with, CO2, global warming, all of that. So at each stage, you're being forced to respond to the problem that we've created. we now solved, if you think about the evolution of computers and the internet, we have, there are all these computers. Oh my God, this is so cool. Let's link them all up. Oh my God, this is amazing. And initially, there's this amazing excitement in Wild West. I mean, what we think we forget is that in 2011, the Arab Spring happens, and everybody's like, Mark Zuckerberg is going to win the Nobel Peace Prize because these revolutions are happening. It's so exciting. Freedom is going to take off a whole new world.
Yeah.
And now we're in 2016, and now we feel very differently.
By the way, Mr. High IQ, we're in 2017.
Or 2017, yeah. Well, there you go.
It's only late in May. You'll get to it around August.
But that's the whole point. Why we need an IQ revolution, so that I can raise mine up from the swamp that it currently resides in.
Steamy, fetid,
steamy, fetid swamp that is my brain. But the I think so now there's a new problem. Right, 2017, 2016.
There are a lot of new problems.
There are a lot of new problems, and we will have to work around them and keep solving them. But
can you even call it solving a problem when
you in the process create a new one?
Essentially what we're doing is we're taking out ever larger loans to pay off the bills we've already got, and always with a higher bill then.
Yeah.
In other words, that's why I'm questioning this notion of progress and the moral arc and all this shit. It's like we're not getting better. We're just working harder and harder to not totally collapse. It's a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, it is a pyramid scheme.
And that's why, have you ever read A Brief History of Progress by Ronald Wright?
I don't think so.
Dude, it is so good. And it's sort of the I'm talking about how civilization arose independently in different places. He looks at all those different civilizations and shows how they all collapsed the same way. They all collapsed. Every civilization that has ever existed has collapsed.
Right.
We think this one's going to be the one that doesn't? I mean, look at it. It's collapsing right now. It's imploding.
Well, I think
it's global this time.
Well, but crucially, the point is that the old way of doing things is imploding, right? So there was an old way of living that no longer makes sense, right? But the question is what emerges from that, right? Is this some sort of catastrophic collapse, right? Like a fall of the Roman Empire type collapse? Or is it
Mayans?
Or is it the collapse of an old order and then a transition into a new order?
Right.
And that's why I think our job is midwifing. We have the opportunity to midwife in because this global civilization has been evolving since 1492.
We better fucking wash our hands, though.
Yeah,
because we've been handling dead shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I think the opportunity...
See how I brought that around?
See how I brought that around? That's what Chris Ryanism is about. But I think
I hope I was on camera when that happened.
Oh, you were. Don't worry.
I
think you must have been. The charisma meter seems to have just settled on you.
It was on you the whole time.
Really?
You'll see if you watch this video. I've been looking down every once in a while,
and occasionally it accidentally ends up on me.
It loves you.
No, it loves you, Chris.
If technology's so smart, how come it doesn't know I'm bad mouthing it?
Well, I think
I'm talking to you, Mevo camera.
But maybe it just has low self-esteem.
That's what we need to do.
Maybe it's like a stripper, It has real daddy issues.
We need to invent technology with low self-esteem. That's it.
So it needs constant validation.
You're a bad boy. You'll never amount to anything.
Yeah, how can I, win your love by being more useful to you?
Yeah, that's what we need. We need technology that's the golden retriever of computing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You don't want a fucking Rottweiler.
No.
You want a golden retriever.
But I think the question is, how do we scale Chris Ryan? So, there's one Chris Ryan, there's Chris Ryanism, and how do we create a whole planet of people who are as reflective and self-aware as Chris Ryan?
I think I got to start donating sperm while I still have some.
But is it genetic or is it cultural? Oh. Do you need to propagate your way of thinking or do you need to propagate your genes?
God, I'd like to think it's the second. It'd be so much more fun.
More fun if it was the genes?
Yeah. Although not if it's like sperm donations. There's no fun in that. That's not.
Can you imagine if you had to donate that much sperm? It would literally be your job. You would just be in the bathroom.
or like have one of those like automatic milking machines or something. Oh, could you? That would be torturous, wouldn't it?
Horrible.
Like, talk about too much of a good thing.
Yeah, but not a good thing. That would not be. That would be. That's not sex at dawn. That is not sex at dawn.
I got you.
That is sex at twilight.
I mean, it sort of sounds like it would be a good metaphor, though. You know, like, well, he got his dick stuck in a milking machine. It's like you get your tit stung at a ringer or something. I always wish I had a good memory for those sorts of expressions.
Oh, you mean like the folksy ones?
Yeah, like he's busier than a one-arm paper hanger. Like those kind of things. I can never remember them, but
you don't need to because you have the internet.
Yeah, but you can't, like, in the middle of a conversation just be like, excuse me, I'm just going to look up a witty line I can't quite remember.
Well, maybe that's the thing. I mean, the other thing, too, though, is that you have all of your fans. And I know at least one of them, Isaiah Gooley, right?
Boy, he's getting a lot of shout-outs.
Well, I think he'll appreciate that. But the point is
hey, Isaiah, write to me. I'll send you a free Civilized to Death T-shirt. I'll get my mom on the job.
You will.
Yeah,
you will.
Do it, buddy.
I'll put you two together in an email.
Do it.
But Isaiah or any of these other people, what they can also do is I bet that your community would go and they would collect together for you all the best. Sort of.
Are those aphorisms?
Yeah,
is
aphorisms.
That what those are?
Yeah. There's one that I love from Katie O'Brien, who I co-wrote The Straight A Conspiracy with. Her dad is from rural Maine. And so one of the ones he always says is, that's up around Sawyer's Barn. And you're like, what? Up around Sawyer's Barn? And that is something that is very far away, right? So it actually has nothing to do with Sawyer's Barn at all.
Wow.
It has to do with just being, like, far away. Yeah.
Well, we've been talking for 2 hours.
Yep.
And it's kind of stuffy in here.
It is.
Not fetid, but I'm feeling like.
Are you in the swamp?
I need to get up and move around.
I'm draining the swamp. Well.
So I'm going to thank you.
I'm going to thank you.
And you're going to thank me because we're co-releasing this.
That's right. We are co-releasing this.
So have we been balanced in terms of who was directing the conversation here? I think it just sort of happened spontaneously.
I think it did. Evolutionary.
Yeah. It evolved.
It evolved.
But we need to come back to this though. I think you and I will probably talk about this for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah. I'm very skeptical of progress. As I say in the book, when you're going in the wrong direction, progress is the last thing you need.
But I think the key thing is that we need you to be skeptical of progress. So that's the wisdom of crowds. You need lots of different voices and lots of different opinions. And as you hash back and forth, everybody is forced to refine their thinking.
Yeah. I should make a list of things that encourage me. In fact, that's sort of what the last section of this book is about. It's things that I look at and say, yeah, that's kind of a good thing, like guaranteed minimum income.
Yeah.
That's a hunter-gatherer approach to life.
I think
everybody has enough.
And I think that's the thing. For me, the reason why I'm hopeful is because I think that a hunter-gatherer approach to life is what the global village will become.
That's what we need. And another key element of a hunter-gatherer approach to life is population control.
Yep.
In hunter-gatherer times, it was infanticide, which is brutal. But, in our time, we've got the technological ability to control it.
Keep it in our pants. Use contraception.
Use contraception. Get a vasectomy. I mean, let's get some advancement in that area. And we could reduce the population on this planet to 50 million people without hurting anyone. No genocide. No massive wars. No disease. Just once you've got guaranteed basic income, you incentivize people and say, look, if you don't have kids, you get a bonus.
That's right.
And but also you've removed the need to have kids to take care of you in old age, and you've incentivized not having kids. So the whole thing, but our mindset is all about growth. Growth.
Well, but crucially, I think that's the thing is that if you look at what are the choices that people are making, a lot of people are having fewer and fewer kids anyway.
Yeah.
So, I think the point is that Chris Ryanism, which is
it's catching on.
I think it is catching on, dude.
It's the wave of the future.
I really do think it is.
Too bad I won't be here to see it.
Oh, but I think you will be. With missionaries like me and Isaiah Gooley.
I'm going to live to be 1,000?
Well, I don't know whether you're going to live to be 1,000, but we're going to propagate we're going to have a Yanomamo jihad on the internet where we propagate Chris Ryanism. That is what the Yanomamo jihad is.
So I'll be like the Che Guevara.
Exactly.
College kids will have posters
of Chris Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great.
So,
a whole lot of good it's going to do me.
Oh, it will do. Are you kidding me?
I'll be dead. What are you talking
think about
about?
how much prestige you'll have as the Che Guevara of the Yanomamo Jihad.
But I'll be dead, dude.
No, you'll have access to so many sexual opportunities.
No one loves you when you're dead.
So much prestige.
Sexual opportunities as a dead guy.
You're not going to be dead, though.
This is getting gross.
You're not going to be dead.
I'll certainly be old. I'm already old.
Yeah, but how fast do you think things change on the internet?
On the internet?
On the internet.
I'm talking about reality.
And if they change on the internet, they change in reality.
I don't want sexual opportunity on the internet. I've already got it. youporn.com. I got all the sexual opportunity I can handle.
Well, but here's the thing. Okay, so what we're going to do is...
By the way, people who Patreon supporters can see over your shoulder my AVN award, my porn award for best non-sex performance.
Wow. But are you saying, Chris, that non-Patreon supporters...
You might want to wash your hands after you.
Are you saying that non-Patreon supporters won't be able to see that?
No, they won't because they don't have access to the video.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. But anyway, I'm going to tell you, Chris, that I think we can change this remarkably quickly. I think with dedicated missionaries like me and Isaiah Gooley, that by the time you take your van...
Are you getting $1 for every time you mention his name?
Isaiah Gooley? Yeah, it's actually... I'm
was this a bet you guys had?
There's some sort of Patreon there. But we're going to make it so that there is so much talk about Chris Ryanism on the internet, and so much talk about the Yanomamo Jihad, that by the time you take your van out on the road, there are going to be groupies lining the streets to see Che Guevara pass.
Throwing petals in front of the van.
And whatever else
So you've seen the van. You were in the van.
I've been in the van. It's amazing.
This camera's going on the dashboard.
Oh, it's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. All right, Hunter Motz. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Is it? Hunter, is it Motz?
I don't know who this guy is. Whatever.
But that's what I also find really impressive is that my name is not a name that you would guess correctly. Right? Like the number of times I've heard my name mispronounced, Motz, Mates, Moats, right? The fact that he guessed it correctly.
He wasn't guessing.
He wasn't guessing.
All right. Thanks, man.